You're a beggar. Dad. The words landed like stones dropped in still water, quiet, sharp, and impossible to pull back. The small dining room sat under the tired hum of a ceiling fan, the air heavy with the scent of reheated stew. Jeremiah Cole, 70 years old, sat at the worn wooden table that he'd built with his own hands decades ago. His hands, still strong though weathered, rested quietly beside a chipped bowl of soup. The steam rose faintly, curling toward the low light. Across the table stood Marcus, his 32-year-old son, dressed in pressed slacks and a designer shirt that still carried the crisp scent of wealth and arrogance. His wristwatch gleamed under the cheap light, the ticking faint but constant, as if it measured the seconds of respect his father no longer deserved. He didn't sit. He just stood there towering and trembling, not from fear but from frustration. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice sharp, "I told you to stop embarrassing me. I can't keep explaining to people why you live like this. You don't even try to look like someone who raised me." Jeremiah didn't answer. He simply lifted the spoon toward his mouth. That silence, that calm, steady silence, enraged Marcus more than any insult could. With one swift motion, Marcus stepped forward, his shoes scraping against the old linoleum floor. He reached for the bowl and in one careless movement, flung it across the room. The sound of ceramic shattering filled the space, soup splattering across the floorboards like muddy rain. The smell of meat and spice burned into the air. "Eat like a beggar," Marcus said coldly, his tone trembling with ego. "That's what you are, aren't you? Sitting here in this old house pretending it means something." The old man didn't move. His eyes lifted, calm, clear, but immeasurably deep. He looked at his son as one looks at a storm, knowing that fighting it is useless. That time will break it faster than anger ever could. Jeremiah reached down, picked up the spoon from the floor and placed it gently on the table. He then wiped his hands on a napkin, his movements deliberate, patient, unshaken. Marcus scoffed. "You can't even defend yourself, can you? Just sit there like always, quiet like you don't care. You think your silence makes you noble? It makes you pathetic." He waited for a reaction, a word, a glare, something, but none came. Instead, Jeremiah's eyes drifted to the window, where faint sunlight spilled through dust. Outside, the wind stirred dry leaves across the yard. His lips parted slightly, almost in a sigh. Then, in a voice so soft it barely reached the air between them, he said, "You've grown loud, Marcus. Louder than your mother ever wanted you to be." Marcus froze for a moment. He hadn't expected that, not the words, but the tone. Calm, grounded, sad, but pride wouldn't let him stay in that silence. He scoffed again, running a hand over his head, pacing. "Don't start with your wise old sayings, Dad. I'm done listening. You don't understand what it takes to live in this world anymore." Jeremiah rose slowly, using the edge of the table for balance. His back was slightly bent, but his presence filled the room like a held breath. He walked past his son without another word and picked up the phone from the hallway counter. Marcus frowned. "Who are you calling?" Jeremiah didn't answer. His thumb scrolled to a contact labeled only L. Harper. His fingers hovered for a moment, not out of hesitation but precision. He pressed the call button, lifted the phone to his ear and spoke softly. "Leroy, it's Jeremiah. I think it's time." A brief silence on the other end, then a voice replied, low and respectful. "Understood. 20 minutes?" Jeremiah gave the smallest nod. His eyes fixed out the window at the gate beyond the yard. "That's fine." He hung up, placed the phone gently on the counter and returned to his chair. Then calmly he reached for a clean bowl, poured what remained from the pot on the stove and began to eat, slowly, quietly, as though nothing had happened. Marcus stood still, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Time for what?" Jeremiah didn't look up. He ate one spoonful at a time, chewing carefully, the scrape of metal against ceramic echoing softly through the house. His silence was louder now, unnerving, steady, final. "Dad, I'm talking to you," Marcus snapped, his voice rising. "What did you just do?" "Who was that?" Still nothing. Just the quiet rhythm of a man who had learned to find power in patience. The tension in the room began to choke the air. Marcus turned toward the door, shaking his head, muttering under his breath, "You're losing it, old man. Call whoever you want. You can't fix what you broke." He slammed the door behind him and stormed out onto the porch, his footsteps crunching across the gravel path. The echo carried through the yard, fading into the sound of distant birds and the soft whistle of afternoon wind. Inside, Jeremiah set down his spoon. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned back in his chair, staring out toward the front gate, the same gate he'd built decades ago when the house was new, and his son was small enough to sit on his shoulders. He breathed out slowly. His face didn't harden, but it softened. He wasn't angry, just resolved. He whispered quietly, almost to himself, "You'll understand soon, son." The world listens when silence calls. The house settled around him, old wood creaking, wind brushing against thin curtains. The clock on the wall ticked steadily towards something neither of them could stop, and somewhere beyond that gate, 20 minutes began to count down. The afternoon light began to shift, turning the house gold at the edges, though its warmth never touched the air inside. Jeremiah sat still in his chair, the quiet hum of the clock keeping him company. His bowl was empty now, his breathing slow. His eyes, though calm, carried something hidden behind them, a patience sharpened by years of disappointment. Outside, a car engine roared to life. Marcus's voice could be heard faintly through the thin walls, still muttering curses to no one in particular. "Beggar, old fool!" The sound of tires grinding against the gravel echoed down the lane. Then came silence again, the kind of silence Jeremiah had lived in for years. He stood slowly, carried his bowl to the sink, and washed it with deliberate care. Every movement was precise, as if to wash away not just the remnants of food, but the weight of words that could never be taken back. As the water ran, he glanced up at the window, the view of the front gate, still slightly ajar from Marcus's hurried exit. A faint breeze carried in dust and the distant hum of life outside his property line. The world went on, but Jeremiah's time had slowed to the rhythm of a man waiting for the inevitable. He dried his hands on a towel and moved to his study, a small room lined with books, old photographs, and a desk that looked older than Marcus himself. On the wall hung a faded photograph, Jeremiah in his youth, standing beside a man in a police uniform, Leroy Harper, his oldest friend. They'd served together years ago in the local force before Jeremiah retired, disillusioned by the corruption that had started to rot through its ranks. But one man, Leroy, had stayed on, rising through the years to become deputy chief of the city police. The two had stayed in quiet contact, though rarely spoke unless the reason mattered, and today it mattered. Jeremiah sat at the desk, pulled out an old envelope, and ran his fingers over the seal. It was labeled Coal Foundation Transfer, pending authorization. Marcus never knew about it. The foundation had been built quietly over decades. Property investments, veterans' stipends, community grants. Jeremiah had never bragged, never shown the wealth he accumulated. He wore simplicity like armor, letting the world assume he had nothing. He preferred it that way. Pride made men reckless. Silence made them invisible. He opened the folder slowly. At the top was a document of power of attorney, currently listing Marcus as co-signer. It had been his wife's wish, a gesture of trust for their son's future. Jeremiah had kept that promise. Until today. He placed the phone beside the document and waited. Exactly 20 minutes after the call, he heard the low hum of an engine approach the gate. Outside, Marcus had driven into town, his anger still smoldering beneath the surface. His thoughts swirled in loops, the insult, the silence, the quiet look in his father's eyes. He replayed it over and over, each time twisting it to make himself right. He doesn't care. He's weak, always has been. He stopped at a cafe, one of those modern glass-walled places where the air smelled like roasted beans and ambition. His friends were already there, gathered around a table. They were loud, successful, sharp-dressed men who carried themselves like the world owed them something. "Marcus, man, where you been?" one of them said. Marcus forced a grin, sliding into a chair. "Just dealing with some family nonsense." They laughed, clinking cups, trading stories of business deals and side hustles. Marcus joined in, but his mind drifted back to that old house, to the bowl he'd thrown, to the silence that followed. He couldn't explain it, but something about that quiet unnerved him. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down. Notification from his bank app. One, then another. Then three in quick succession. Account alert. Unusual activity detected. Withdrawal confirmed. $45,000. Funds transfer pending. Coal Foundation Trust. He frowned. What the hell? He tapped the screen, but the app froze. He tried again, nothing. Then the page refreshed and his balance dropped to 0. Just like that, 0. Yo, Marcus, you good? One of his friends asked. Marcus stood abruptly, his voice shaking. I need to make a call. He rushed outside, his pulse pounding. His fingers dialed his father's number instinctively, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried the bank next. No answer. His hands trembled as he climbed into his car, fumbling for his wallet, his cards, his breath. Everything felt wrong. The world that once bowed to him suddenly felt far too large. He drove home fast, tires screeching as he turned corners, sweat gathering on his forehead. He didn't even realize that a black sedan was following a few cars behind. Silent, steady, deliberate. Back at the house, Jeremiah watched through the window as dust rose on the distant road. He didn't need binoculars. He could feel it, the shift, the consequence, the return. He picked up the phone once more when it rang. Jeremiah? So yes, it's done, said Leroy's deep voice. The trust's been locked down. All transfers complete. Marcus is no longer listed as a beneficiary. You're safe. I'm not the one who needed saving, Jeremiah said quietly. Thank you, brother. You sure you want him to hit bottom like this? He built the hole himself. I'm just letting him see how deep it goes. There was silence on the line, then a quiet sigh. He's already on his way back to you. Probably doesn't even know why. Good, Jeremiah said. The gate's open. He hung up. He moved to the porch, the late afternoon sun washing him in gold. He stood with his cane, his posture upright, his face unreadable. The world around him slowed. The wind carried the faint echo of an approaching car engine. Frantic, unsteady, scared. He turned his gaze toward the dirt road, the same one Marcus had driven down in arrogance not an hour ago. Dust clouds swirled in the air as a black car came into view, speeding, braking hard just before the gate. Marcus stumbled out, panic written all over him. His phone in one hand, wallet in the other. His voice cracked against the emptiness of the yard. Dad, something's wrong with my accounts. My money, it's gone. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw his father standing there motionless, one hand resting on his cane. Jeremiah didn't speak. He didn't move. His eyes met his son's from across the fence, calm, level, unyielding. Marcus took a step closer, gripping the metal bars of the gate. His voice was trembling now, not with anger, but with fear. Dad, I swear I didn't mean what I said earlier. Just please tell me what's going on. Jeremiah simply turned his gaze toward the horizon, as if listening to something far away, the sound of truth catching up. He finally spoke, his tone even, his words deliberate. You said a man who eats simply is a beggar. He took a slow step forward. But a man who loses everything and learns humility, he's finally fed. Marcus's lips parted, but no sound came out. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to shout. But there was nothing left to say, only the sound of wind moving through the gate, and a father's quiet justice settling into place. The evening fell heavy over the cold property, pulling long shadows across the yard. The air was thick with the smell of rain, though the clouds hadn't yet broken. Marcus stood just outside the iron gate, gripping the bars, his knuckles white. The last sliver of daylight shimmered on the tears that had started to streak down his face. Jeremiah hadn't moved much since he came to the porch. He simply watched, silent as stone, the cane resting in his right hand. His grey eyes held no triumph, no gloating, just a calmness that seemed to draw the air out of the moment. Marcus's voice cracked through the silence. Dad, please. I don't know what happened. All my money's gone. I tried calling the bank, but they said the accounts were frozen. Every one of them. He pressed his forehead to the cold metal gate, his breath fogging in short, panicked bursts. You have to help me, please. I can't lose everything. You're the only one who... Jeremiah turned slightly, his gaze cutting through the distance between them. The only one who what? His tone was soft, but it carried a weight that landed like a blow. The only one who'll still stand in front of you after everything you've done? Marcus swallowed hard, shame flickering in his eyes. I was angry, okay? I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to call you a beggar. You meant it, Jeremiah interrupted, his voice calm but final. Words don't slip from an empty heart, Marcus. They come from what's already full. The words hung in the air, cold and clean, like rain about to fall. Marcus stepped back, shaking his head. He tried to compose himself, to reclaim the confidence he wore like armor, but it was gone, stripped bare with his bank accounts. "You can't just stand there and watch me suffer," Marcus shouted. "You're my father!" Jeremiah's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite sadness. "A father gives, son. I gave you everything, time, love, the roof over your head. And when that wasn't enough, I gave you space to destroy yourself." Marcus clenched his fists. "You think this teaches me something?" "It's not meant to teach," Jeremiah said. "It's meant to remind." He turned and started to walk back inside, slow and steady. The sound of his cane on the wooden floor echoed like a metronome, one that marked every regret, every unspoken truth. Marcus watched helplessly as the door closed. The wind picked up, carrying a low rumble of thunder. The night came quickly, swallowing the property in shades of grey. Marcus sank to the ground near the gate, clutching his head. His car sat behind him, headlights off, the engine silent. For the first time in his adult life, he had nowhere to go. Inside, Jeremiah stood by the kitchen window. He could see his son's silhouette through the curtains, a dark shape in the fading light, still broken, small. His heart tugged with something painful but resolute. He moved to his study again, lowering himself into the old leather chair. He reached for a notebook, its pages filled with handwritten ledgers, property deeds, and a lifetime of planning. Every decision he'd made in the last 2 decades was there. And at the bottom of one page was a list titled Contingencies for Marcus. Each item carried quiet intention. Protect his inheritance from his arrogance. Test his gratitude. If he forgets where he came from, remind him. Jeremiah traced his finger along the last line, his jaw tightening. He didn't hate his son. He hated what his son had become. The difference was everything. He looked again at the old framed photo of his wife on the shelf. Lena Cole, her smile caught in soft sunlight, the kind of smile that made forgiveness look effortless. He could almost hear her voice. "Don't be too hard on him, Jerry. He's young. He'll find his way." He sighed deeply. "He's not young anymore, Lena. He's lost his way, and maybe he needs to be lost a little longer before he wants to be found." He stood, walked to the window, and watched as Marcus began pacing near the gate. The boy's pride had been replaced by desperation, checking his phone, making frantic calls, cursing softly under his breath. Then slowly he sank to the ground again, his back against the metal. The rain began to fall, light at first, then steady. Jeremiah turned off the light in his study. Darkness filled the house, except for the faint glow of the porch lamp. He let the night speak for him. By midnight, Marcus's phone battery had died. His expensive clothes clung to him, soaked through with rain. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his hands trembling as he tried to light a cigarette that kept going out. He looked up at the house, its windows dark, its owner silent. A house that once smelled like comfort and old coffee now felt like judgment itself. He shouted again, his voice hoarse. "Dad, please." "I'm sorry." But the only reply was thunder. He pressed his palms together, whispering, "I'll change, I swear. Just help me, please." From behind the curtain, Jeremiah watched. His expression didn't change, but something inside him softened. He remembered when Marcus was a child, a small boy who used to sit by that same gate, waiting for him to come home from work, holding a baseball glove too big for his hand. Now that same boy sat there as a man undone by his own ego. Jeremiah whispered softly to himself, "You wanted to play grown man, Marcus. This is what it costs." He dialed a number on his old phone, the same one he'd used earlier that day. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Jeremiah." "Everything holding steady?" "Yes, Leroy, but I might need one more thing." "Name it." "I need you to send the sheriff out here in the morning. I want Marcus's car towed. Make it look official. It'll scare him enough to listen." "You sure? That'll rattle him." "Good," Jeremiah said, a calm certainty in his tone. "He's been living on noise. Maybe silence isn't enough." He hung up and looked one last time through the window. Marcus was curled up now under the porch awning, eyes closed, trembling slightly from cold and exhaustion. The rain softened, the thunder drifted away, and the night settled like a heavy blanket over both of them. Jeremiah closed his eyes. He whispered the same prayer he used to say over Marcus when he was a boy. "Lord, teach him humility, the kind that feeds, not starves." Then he turned off the last light in the house, The gate creaked quietly in the wind like the sigh of a story not yet finished. The first light of morning crept slowly through the trees, painting long golden fingers across the wet gravel. The rain had stopped hours ago, but its echo lingered, small droplets sliding from leaves hitting the ground with soft rhythm. The yard was quiet except for that, and the faint hum of an approaching engine. Jeremiah Cole stood by the window, already awake. He hadn't slept. He rarely did these days. Rest wasn't a habit for men who'd lived through both war and fatherhood. His short grey beard caught the morning light, turning silver. His eyes, though tired, were steady as stone. He watched through the curtains as a Black County tow truck rolled up the road, followed closely by a sheriff's car. The sight didn't bring satisfaction, not even relief. Just confirmation. A simple reminder that justice didn't always need fire. Sometimes it only needed order. Outside, Marcus stirred. His body ached from the cold concrete where he'd slept by the gate. He woke to the sound of tires crunching against gravel and the flash of blue and red lights painting the dawn. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, until the sharp tap of a flashlight on his car window jolted him fully awake. "Marcus Cole?" the sheriff called out. Marcus squinted up at the man, rubbing his face. What's going on?" "Got a notice from the property owner," the sheriff said. "This car needs to be moved." "Looks like you're trespassing." Marcus stumbled to his feet. "Trespassing? That's my father's house." "He called you?" The sheriff shrugged. "Don't know who called, son. Just doing my job." Jeremiah stepped out onto the porch, his cane tapping softly against the wood. The sound alone turned heads. He didn't speak, and he didn't need to. His presence, even at 70, was command enough. Marcus's face twisted in disbelief. "Dad, what are you doing?" Jeremiah looked at him, eyes heavy with quiet finality. "You said I was nothing. A beggar, remember?" His tone was calm, even, not angry, not cruel. Just truth spoken without emotion. Marcus blinked rapidly, trying to steady his voice. "I didn't mean it. You know that. I was just upset." "You meant it," Jeremiah said softly. "You meant every word you ever said when you thought I couldn't fight back." The sheriff gave Jeremiah a nod of respect, then gestured toward Marcus. "Sir, if this vehicle belongs to him, we'll just move it off your property line." "That's fine," Jeremiah replied simply. "Make sure it's done right." Marcus's hands trembled as he tried to reason. "Dad, please, this is crazy. I just need time to figure things out. I don't have my cards, my phone's dead, Time." Jeremiah interrupted. "You've had years of it. Time was all I ever gave you." The sheriff waved for his men to hook the car up to the tow truck. The metal clanked, the chain groaning under the strain, the sound cutting into the morning like an old memory being dragged away. Marcus stepped forward, desperate. "Wait, no. Please, I'll leave. I'll move it. Just give me a minute." "It's out of my hands now," Jeremiah said quietly. "And it's time something else left too, your pride." The younger man froze, staring at him. There it was again, that unbearable calm, that silence that spoke louder than rage. Marcus's voice broke. "You can't do this to me." Jeremiah's face didn't change. "I didn't do this to you, Marcus." "You did." The sheriff gave a short nod toward the truck driver, and the vehicle started to roll forward. Marcus lunged, pounding the hood once in frustration, but the driver didn't stop. He stood there, drenched in morning light and shame, watching his only sense of status disappear down the road. The silence afterward was almost too much to bear. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. Jeremiah turned slowly and started back toward the house. Each step echoed, the wooden porch creaking beneath his weight, the cane marking the rhythm of consequence. Marcus followed him to the gate, his voice cracking now under tears he couldn't hold back. "Please, Dad, don't shut me out. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do." Jeremiah stopped halfway up the porch steps. The morning light hit the side of his face, outlining the years, the battles, the restraint. He turned slightly, his voice deep but soft. "Do you know what the hardest part of being a father is, son?" Marcus didn't answer. "It's knowing when to stop saving your child from himself." He turned, opened the door, and stepped inside. The sound of the lock turning was sharp, final. Marcus sank to his knees outside the gate, head bowed. His breath came in ragged waves. He whispered something between sobs. It might have been prayer, it might have been apology. Inside the house, Jeremiah set his cane against the wall and walked into the kitchen. The morning sunlight filtered through lace curtains, turning the air golden. On the counter sat a pot of coffee, still warm from earlier. He poured himself a cup. Steady hands, quiet mind. The radio murmured softly in the background, old gospel tunes that spoke of forgiveness and faith. He listened not for the words, but for the calm in between them. He sat down at the table watching the steam rise from his cup. Outside, his son was still sobbing near the gate, the sound faint but real. Jeremiah closed his eyes, his face unreadable. He wasn't celebrating victory. He wasn't savoring revenge. He was simply breathing in the truth, the kind of justice that doesn't shout, doesn't strike, doesn't destroy. It just waits and lets life even the scales. The old man took one slow sip of his coffee, the bitterness grounding him in the present. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Now you understand what hunger really is, boy. Not the kind that fills the stomach, the kind that empties the soul. He glanced toward the window. The image of Marcus kneeling by the gate blurred slightly through the glass. A son broken by his own arrogance. A father unbent by his silence, and in that quiet house, Jeremiah let the moment stand exactly as it was. Unspoken, unfinished, unforgettable. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering leaves down the road where Marcus's car had vanished. The air smelled of rain, metal, and something new, humility. Jeremiah whispered to himself, maybe now he'll learn how to ask, not demand. He turned off the radio, the silence filling the space once again. His eyes fell on the framed photo of his late wife by the table. Lena, he murmured. Our boy's finally learning. The morning light caught the edge of the frame, reflecting into his coffee cup, a shimmer of memory, soft and fleeting, and as the day began in full, the sound of Marcus's quiet crying outside was no longer painful to hear. It was proof that pride can't live long without someone feeding it, and Jeremiah had finally stopped feeding it. The day stretched long, heavy, and slow. By noon, the sun had climbed high over the coal property, burning off the damp chill left by last night's rain. The ground steamed faintly, the air thick with humidity and shame. Marcus still sat by the gate. His clothes had dried in uneven patches, his shoes were caked with mud, and his once proud posture had crumbled into a weary slump. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, the faint laughter of passing children, seemed to mock him. Jeremiah remained inside, quiet as ever. From the front window he could see Marcus through the lace curtains, that same iron gate standing between them, like a sentence that had been written years ago. He didn't move to open the door. Not yet. Some lessons had to soak deep, and silence was the only rain strong enough to make them grow. By early afternoon, a car slowed in front of the house, an older white sedan with two women inside. They recognized Marcus instantly. Small-town neighbors always did. Ain't that Jeremiah's boy? One whispered. Sure looks like him. What's he doing sitting on the ground like that? Marcus looked up, blinking against the sunlight, and saw their faces turn away just as fast. The car sped off, its tires throwing dust into the air. He dropped his head again, his throat tight with humiliation. Every hour made it worse. Not just the waiting, but the knowledge that people were beginning to see what he'd done, what he'd become. He reached for his phone again, pressing the power button out of habit. It didn't even vibrate now, dead like the life he'd built around it. Inside the house, Jeremiah moved quietly through his routine. The kettle on, the floor swept, the chair adjusted just right to face the window. The rhythm of a man who knew patience not as punishment, but as power. He watched Marcus from time to time, not with anger or cruelty, but a deep, wordless sadness. There was something in his son's stillness that reminded him of his own youth, the moments when pride had cost him too much. He whispered under his breath, "You're me, just louder." As the day wore on, Marcus began to pace. He'd knock on the gate now and then, not shouting anymore, just tapping gently like a boy knocking at a door he wasn't sure he deserved to enter. "Dad," he called softly once, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have said those things. Please, can we just talk?" Jeremiah sat still. He could hear every word, every tremor in that voice. But silence was still speaking for him. The world outside, however, wasn't silent. Two men from down the road, old friends of Jeremiah's, happened to walk past. They paused, surprised to see Marcus still sitting there. Marcus Cole? Ain't you supposed to be working over at the dealership? Marcus swallowed, forcing a small, embarrassed smile. Yeah, things got complicated. Complicated how? It's family stuff. They exchanged glances, that unspoken kind of pity that burned hotter than insults, and continued down the street. Marcus exhaled shakily, staring down at his hands. He realized then how far he'd fallen, from the man who used to boast about his cars, his salary, his connections, to someone who couldn't even lift his head in front of his father's gate. Inside, Jeremiah received a call. He reached for his phone, that old flip device, and answered. Jeremiah Cole. Mr. Cole, this is Leroy, just checking in. You want me to release those transfers now? Jeremiah thought for a long moment before replying. No, let him sit with it. Understood. He hung up and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the horizon. The late afternoon light was spilling gold across the floorboards. Dust floated in the air like ghosts of the past, memories of laughter, dinners, arguments, and forgiveness that never quite reached full bloom. He rubbed his thumb over his wedding ring, still on his hand after all these years, and whispered, You'd hate to see him like this. Lena. His late wife's photo sat nearby on a small shelf framed in walnut. Her smile, gentle, patient, seemed to answer him even through silence. I know, Jeremiah sighed, but you'd hate even more the man he's been. Maybe this is the only way he remembers who raised him. By dusk, the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one. Marcus hadn't moved far from the gate. His body was exhausted, his eyes red, his stomach empty. But the hunger inside him wasn't for food anymore. It was for dignity. He replayed every cruel thing he'd said to his father, every insult, every act of disrespect. He remembered that night in the kitchen, the spilled food, the laughter he'd forced when Jeremiah said nothing. He remembered how proud he'd felt after, thinking he'd won some invisible argument. Now with his back pressed to cold metal, he realized he'd never won anything. He'd only lost what couldn't be replaced, respect and maybe love. He looked up again at the porch. The light was on. Behind the curtain, a faint movement. Jeremiah watching, still silent. Marcus pressed his hand against the gate, whispering softly, Dad. Please let me in, no answer. Only the soft buzz of crickets and the creak of the old wind chime that hung by the porch. Lena's wind chime. It swayed gently, the melody fragile and beautiful, carrying through the dusk. It sounded like forgiveness, but not yet. Later that evening, Jeremiah stepped outside. He didn't approach the gate, just stood by the porch, his cane tapping once against the floor. The air was cooler now, the world quieter. Marcus looked up, startled. Their eyes met across the distance. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Jeremiah finally said, You can come in when you learn to knock like a man, not cry like a boy. Marcus froze, trying to understand the meaning. How do I do that? He stammered. Jeremiah's face softened slightly in the porch light. You'll know when it's time. Then he turned, walked back inside and closed the door again. Marcus sat there for a while longer, watching the door through blurred vision. The gate between them wasn't locked, but somehow it might as well have been made of stone, and as the night settled in again, Marcus whispered to himself, How do I knock like a man? When I stopped being one, the moment I disrespected my father. The words vanished into the dark, carried off by the wind, the first honest thing he'd said in years. The night folded over the Cole house like a slow-moving tide, calm and heavy. The hum of crickets filled the dark, the kind of sound that makes even regret sound honest. Jeremiah Cole sat in his armchair by the window, the same chair where he'd sat through storms and summers, through the noise of a family and the quiet of losing one. The light from a single lamp washed his face in gold, showing every crease, every quiet victory, every scar of patience. Outside, beyond the gate, Marcus hadn't left. He sat cross-legged on the ground, his back against the iron bars, shivering under the weight of his own pride. His phone was dead, his car gone, his wallet useless. The only thing left to carry was guilt. The wind had calmed. The moon hung low, silver and sharp. Jeremiah reached for the small wooden box on the table beside him. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. He opened it gently. It was an old letter, the last one his wife had written before she passed. Her handwriting curved beautifully across the page. Jerry, promise me, when Marcus loses his way, don't chase him. Let him find home on his own feet. He smiled faintly, his fingers brushing the words. I kept my promise, Lena, he whispered. He looked back out the window. The porch light cast a pale circle on the yard, catching Marcus's outline, a shadow of the man who once strutted through life thinking love was permanent, no matter how cruel he became. Just before dawn, Marcus stirred. His body ached, but his mind was louder. He thought about his father's words. You can come in when you learn to knock like a man. He didn't understand at first. He thought it meant strength, control, the things he always associated with manhood. But now, sitting alone, he realized Jeremiah had never defined being a man through power. He'd defined it through humility. Marcus rose slowly, brushing the dirt from his hands. His knees trembled as he stepped closer to the gate. This time he didn't rattle it, didn't shout. He just stood there, breathing in the morning air, and whispered, Dad, may I come home? The words were small, bare, honest. Inside, Jeremiah heard them, clear through the morning silence. He closed his eyes for a long moment, letting the weight of them settle. Then, for the first time in days, he stood without leaning too heavily on his cane. He opened the door. The creak echoed through the dawn, like a memory reborn. Marcus looked up, eyes wide, unsure what to expect. Jeremiah stepped onto the porch, slow and deliberate, his posture straight despite the years. You called me a beggar, Jeremiah said, voice steady. You threw my food, my dignity, my name. Tell me, son, who's the beggar now? Marcus swallowed, voice breaking. I am, Jeremiah nodded once. And do you know why? Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes. Because I forgot who gave me everything. No, Jeremiah said quietly. Because you thought what I gave was yours to keep forever. The words hit harder than any punishment could. Marcus dropped to his knees. His hands trembled as he gripped the cold iron gate, pressing his forehead against it. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Jeremiah watched him for a long moment. The dawn light glowed around them, orange, pink, and gold, bathing the old man's short grey beard in soft fire. His silence stretched, but this time it didn't hurt. It healed. He stepped closer, reached out, and unlocked the gate. The latch clicked open, small, simple, final. Marcus looked up, confused. You're letting me in? Jeremiah's eyes softened. You were never locked out, son. You just forgot how to knock. Marcus broke down completely. His cries filled the yard, raw and guttural. The kind that come when pride finally collapses. Jeremiah didn't move to comfort him. He didn't need to. The lesson was in the stillness, in the fact that the gate had always been open. After a long while, Marcus rose shakily and stepped through the entrance. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes, every sound feeling sacred. He looked at his father, the man he'd mocked, insulted, belittled, and saw something he hadn't seen before, not weakness, not old age, but power. The kind that doesn't need noise to be heard. Dad, Marcus whispered, how did you do all this? The accounts, the car, the police. Everything? Jeremiah turned back toward the porch. I didn't do much. Just made a few calls. You built your life on my name, Marcus. Your business loans, your home, even your credit line. Every door you walked through opened, because I once paid the cost. You forgot that, Marcus stared, stunned. You still had control? Jeremiah nodded once, calm and unapologetic. Not control. Responsibility. A father doesn't stop protecting his son, even when his son tries to burn the bridge between them. I just made sure the bridge stayed mine. He turned, his voice lowering. So when you threw away my food and called me a beggar, all I did was show you how it feels when you lose what you don't respect. Marcus looked at the ground, ashamed. You could have destroyed me. Jeremiah's face was unreadable. No, I could have saved you. But saving ain't always soft. He stepped past him, down toward the gate, and looked out at the road Marcus had once sped down in his expensive car, the same one now sitting impounded somewhere. You'll get your accounts back, Jeremiah said. You'll start again. But before that, you're going to sit at this table, eat the food you threw, and remember who made it possible. Marcus nodded, eyes wet. Yes, sir. The sir hung between them, respectful, heavy, true. Jeremiah didn't smile, but his shoulders eased just slightly. He opened the front door and stepped aside. Marcus hesitated for a second, then walked in. The air inside smelled of coffee and old wood, the same way it had when he was a child. He sat at the table, trembling hands resting in front of him. Jeremiah placed a plate down. Nothing fancy, just beans, cornbread, and a small bowl of soup. Marcus looked at it and whispered, "Thank you." Jeremiah nodded, sitting across from him. The silence was different now, not punishment, but peace. "Eat, son," he said quietly. "Eat like a man who's hungry to change." Marcus lifted his spoon, his eyes glistening. Outside, the first rays of morning broke through the window, lighting both their faces, the son humbled, the father unbroken. And as Jeremiah leaned back, his cane resting against the table, he whispered under his breath, "Some lessons don't need revenge. Just patience." The wind outside carried the sound of the chime again, Lena's wind chime, soft, gentle, forgiving. The house was quiet. The justice was complete.